Hi, everyone. My name is Natalie Halleck, and I am an editor at Park Row Books, and I have the honor of being Sarah Penner's editor here, and we are just so thrilled to have you all join us tonight for the celebration of the Lost Apothecary launch, as it just published yesterday. And it's already flying off the shelves. Thank you so much for our participating booksellers, Foxtail Bookshop, Mysterious Galaxy, Murder by the Book, Oxford Exchange, Parnassus Books, Phoenix Books, and eShaver. You are all amazing.
Okay.
And so
they want this woman who's going to be late to be invited on the screen.
Okay.
All right, first up, some housekeeping. Feel free to use the chat box on the right to converse with your fellow fans. Below me, you'll see the Ask a Question box. Sarah and Kristin will be taking questions at the end, so please add, all of those burning questions that you have there. And we'll do our best to get to as many of them as we can. And finally, for anyone who hasn't yet bought The Lost Apothecary, hi, Kristin.
Hey.
By clicking through to the link below, you can buy a copy for any friends, family, neighbors, your pet, anyone else who might be in need of an unputdownable thrill ride about a female apothecary serial killer, which I would argue is everyone. And so to introduce the stars of tonight, Sarah Penner is the debut novelist of The Lost Apothecary. It's a novel that I knew was incredibly special as soon as it crossed my desk. I devoured it so quickly, I had to preempt it the very next day. And really the rest is history. And we're just getting started. The Lost Apothecary will now be published in 24 countries. It's also a March pick for Indie Next, as voted on by indie booksellers nationwide, and is the #1 pick for library reads, as voted on by librarians around the country. And The Lost Apothecary actually set Harlequin's record as its first ever #1 library reads pick. So it's just shattering some records while we're at it. And as if that's not enough, this week it was announced that The Lost Apothecary is the BNN Discover pick. It's also Amazon's top debut of March, and was also chosen for the prestigious Book of the Month Club selection as one of the 5 featured titles for the month of March. And it's also been named a most anticipated read in 2021 by media such as O Magazine, CNN, Newsweek, Good Housekeeping, Bustle, Pop Sugar, and many more. The list goes on and on. The Lost Apothecary is a book that's close to my own heart. It's been truly amazing to see the overwhelming enthusiasm it's already gotten from readers, reviewers, and retailers around the world. And this is Sarah's first novel, and she lives in St. Petersburg, Florida, with her husband, Mark, and their spunky miniature dachshund, Zoe. In her free time, Sarah enjoys running, hot yoga, trying new recipes, hiking, scuba diving, traveling around the world, and writing breakout books. And you can learn more about Sarah at sarahpenner.com. And we are so lucky to have historical fiction star Kristin Harmel with us tonight. And she is the New York Times bestselling, USA Today bestselling, and #1 international bestselling author of The Book of Lost Names, The Winemaker's Wife, The Room on Rue Amelie, and dozens of other novels that have been translated into 29 languages and sold all over the world. She is also the co-founder and co-host of the weekly web show and podcast Friends and Fiction. She lives in Orlando, Florida with her husband and young son. And her new novel, The Forest of Vanishing Stars, will be publishing on July 6th, 2021. And I know I will personally be adding it to my TBR list for sure. Chris and Sarah, I will let you both take it away from here.
Great.
Thank you. Hi, Kristin. How are you?
Hey, I just got here in the nick of time, right?
I knew you
Sliding in from Friends and Fiction.
For everyone on the call, Kristin was just at 7 o'clock because we're on the East Coast. She was on this other event. And so we knew she was going to be popping in right at 8 or 8:01. So, and I fully trusted that you would be here on time.
I'm here. I like to keep you on your toes, Sarah.
Yes.
Well, it's so good to see you, and congratulations. What a week for you. And my goodness, just listening to Natalie read that whole just laundry list of accolades for this book was just so impressive. I may have missed it at the beginning because I did pop in a little bit late. And I know Natalie talked a little bit about the book. Do you want to tell us tonight what the book's about? Kind of give us your pitch about the book?
Yeah, I have a few things that I'll start with. First of all, I want to echo Natalie's thank you to, I think we have 7 participating booksellers tonight.
Awesome.
And so I want to thank them, all indie bookstores who have done such a phenomenal job spreading the word to their readers and to their followers. And I think right now supporting independent bookstores is more important than ever. And so I'm so thankful to have such a great backing from our indie bookstores. And then also I want to thank Natalie, who's not on screen anymore, but she'll pop back in later. In case it wasn't clear to everybody at the beginning, she is my editor. So she is the person who bought the book overnight. She works with Park Row Books, and she is the person who has seen the draft in its youngest, most unformed state. And so many of her developmental suggestions went into the final copy that now many of you have and have read. And so I think that editors, they do such an important job behind the scene, and their names get mentioned in the acknowledgments, but I think it's more important to just share with the whole world. Like, Natalie has been such a collaborative, wonderful team member. And I just feel so truly honored to work with her and the whole Park Row Books team. So my book and what it's about. And I think that a lot of people on the call probably know what it's about, and that's why they're joining. But here, for anyone who hasn't heard of The Lost Apothecary or hasn't read it, it is about a female apothecary in 18th century London who sells well-disguised poisons to women seeking vengeance on the men who have wronged them. And 200 years later, in present-day London, a woman goes mudlarking, and we'll talk about mudlarking more in a little bit, but she goes mudlarking on the River Thames, and she finds this small, mysterious apothecary vial, and she suspects that she has found the culprit in the never-solved apothecary murders that haunted London 2 centuries prior. And of course, their stories collide in a really interesting twist of fate at the end. So that's a little synopsis for everybody.
Well, and it's fantastic. I loved the book. I had the opportunity to read it early, and I really liked it. Before we start talking a little bit more about the novel, though, Sarah, I want to ask you, how has this last week been for you? I mean, there's been so much big news coming your way, and, you know, that feeling of launching a book into the world for the very first time is extraordinary. I mean, gosh, I can barely remember. Mine was like a million years ago, 2006. But I mean, it's something you've never experienced before, and you'll never experience again. Can you kind of put us in your shoes this week and talk to us about that?
Yeah, definitely. And I think the complexity of feelings and emotions is more than just the last week. It's really, we sold this book in November 2019. So it's been about 14 months, and it's been just a series of fun, exciting news. And so many of the things that Natalie just mentioned, whether it's Book of the Month or the Barnes & Noble Discover Pick, these are things that I've known about for months, and they're just, you have to kind of sit on these secrets, and you know this, Kristin.
Yeah.
And so by the time it comes out into the world and everyone is so excited, you're like, oh yeah, that I can finally talk about that now. And so it's been such a fun whirlwind, and there have been things about debuting in a pandemic that have been really challenging.
Yeah.
But when the pandemic first started, I remember thinking like, oh my gosh, this might really derail some of my hopes for this next year of publicity and promoting.
Yeah.
But actually, and I was just telling Natalie this last week, there have been a lot of silver linings. So for example, I think probably some of you on this call tuned in to an event in the fall with Library Journal that I was on a panel with Kristin Hannah. And so many thousands of people tuned into this event for Kristin Hannah. And I cannot see that having happened if we had not been in a pandemic, because I don't think I would have been invited onto a real life panel with Kristin Hannah. So I think there's things like that are silver linings, and you just kind of have to go with the flow and be adaptable and be flexible. And so much has exceeded my expectations. Like every time Natalie emails or calls, I just am kind of I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what now? Like she really only has good news. So I love seeing her name pop up in my inbox.
Oh, that's awesome. And I've got to tell you, I sold my first book in April of 2004, and it didn't come out until February of 2006. So it was almost 2 years. And it had to do with it was the launch of an imprint that got delayed and whatever. But what that resulted in for me was having told everyone, oh, I sold my book. I'm going to have a book coming out. And then like time ticked by and ticked by.
Yes.
And I think people thought I had lied to them. But really, I did write some books.
Yeah.
It happens.
Well, I hope that I hope I can have a writing career as half as successful as you, Kristin, because I know it feels like forever ago that you launched your debut. And so I wonder, like, where will I be this many years down the road and hopefully as successful as you are?
Oh, that's so sweet. If really, for me, it was just me saying I'm old and I can't remember the distant past when I was less old. So, so Sarah, can you talk to us a little bit about why you decided to set this book in late 18th century London? To me, that feels like a time period in historical fiction that's a little bit untapped right now. I mean, I write about World War II, and there are a lot of people writing about World War II, but this was a time period I'm not as familiar with. What drew you to that?
Yes. So the book is set in 1791, so late 18th century, which is also commonly referred to as Georgian London because it was King George III was on the throne. And you really don't see this much in commercial fiction. So we see a lot of World War II, like you just said, Kristin, a lot of Victorian London, a lot of Tudors, so Anne Boleyn. Yep. But you really don't see many stories in commercial fiction set in 18th century London. And I started researching this era probably 5 or 6 years ago now. And I realized that there is just so much scandal and drama that I think has been untapped. So some people have probably heard about the gin craze. There were loads of just brothels and police that you couldn't trust, like police corruption. There was all sorts of interesting things happening in society at that time. And so that was how I first got interested in 18th century London. But then when I started writing The Lost Apothecary, I realized something really serendipitous. And what it was is this. So obviously the book is about a poisoner. And part of why she can get away with her sinister behavior is because she disguises her poisons in food and wine in all sort of creative ways. That's really her expertise and why she's so renowned. So naturally we think, okay, if someone like that existed today, that would be immediately picked up in an autopsy because we have forensic toxicology science. Well, that technology in that science really didn't exist until the 1850s. So about 60 years after my book is set. So the era in The Lost Apothecary is this perfect confluence of what I'm personally interested in, and this era that I think is really scandalous, even though it's not popular. I find it really interesting. But then also we didn't have the science that could have detected poison, after death. So it was the perfect time for her to live and do her work. And I don't know, it's been so much fun just having those two things meet and that being my debut novel set in that era.
I love that. It feels like it was meant to come together that way. That's perfect. So the book is told in two narratives, in this past time period that you were just talking about, 1791, and also in the present day, but it's not told from 2 points of view, it's told from 3. There are 2 in the past and 1 in the present. Can you talk a little bit about why you decided on the dual time period, but having 3 different narrators?
Yes. So the book,
or points of view.
Yes.
Points of view, sorry.
No, that's fine. So as Kristin just mentioned, the book is told, of course, in 1791 and present day. So we've got 2 timelines, but then it's also told through the points of view of 3 women. We have the apothecary. We have a 12-year-old who goes to the apothecary shop to obviously purchase poison. And then we have in the present day, the woman who finds the vial and kind of starts to unravel this secret. So the reason I did the story that way is there's a couple of them. First of all, the story is a mystery. So we're trying to find out as the reader, what happened to this apothecary? Who was she and what happened and how did her business run at the end. And I don't want to give away any spoilers, which is why I'm kind of saying this in vague words. So it's a mystery. And one of the ways that authors, this is kind of a sneak peek into how mystery and thriller writers work. One of the ways that we drag the reader along and string you along and make you keep turning the pages is we switch points of view so that we can end chapters on a cliffhanger and very strategically reveal information kind of in a drip feed almost.
Yeah.
And so people who've read the book will notice that a lot of the chapters in the book end on an information reveal. So I'll give you just a little bit, and then I make you turn the page, and it's a different timeline and a different narrator. So it's frustrating in the best possible way, because as a reader, you want to keep turning the pages. So that's part of why I structured it with 2 timelines and 3 people, is so that I could very strategically delay the information and just hop to a different narrator or a different timeline when I needed the story to go on without giving you too much information. And then I'll just say one more thing. So some people have asked me why I included the young 12-year-old. Her name is Eliza. And they said, why did you include her? Was she one of the first characters that came to mind for you? And she was actually the last of the 3 points of view that I decided to incorporate.
Okay.
And the reason is because early in the book, you see her walk into the apothecary shop, and she buys poison. That's not a spoiler. It's in like the first few chapters. And she walks out of the apothecary shop. And so all of that is told from the apothecary's point of view. But then I knew the reader would want to follow and be alongside Eliza when she goes back home and decides to dispense the poison. And so I knew I needed Eliza's point of view, because I wanted the reader to be alongside this 12-year-old as she made this really scary, terrifying, but empowering decision. And so that's why Eliza's point of view initially came into the story. And then she kind of became my favorite character as the story went along.
Listening to you talk about that makes me wonder. I think I had assumed reading the book that if you were closest to one character, it might have been the modern day character, right? I mean, we have a lot in common with someone living in our current time. But would you say that there was maybe a piece of you in each of the 3 main characters?
That's such a good question, Kristin. So there is so much of me in Caroline, and there are people listening right now who know me very well and know exactly which parts of Caroline relate to me. Eliza, I don't see a whole lot of myself in her. She's just spunky and inquisitive and kind of ornery. And so, I was ornery. My mom's on this call as well. I was ornery when I was younger. But yeah, and then Nella, the apothecary, she of course knows all of these herbs and these poisons really well. And I have nowhere near the knowledge that she has, but I do know a few things. So there's a little bit of me, but the most would be in Caroline.
I mean, the whole reason I came tonight was because I assumed you knew a few things. And when you asked me, I was like, I fear what'll happen if I don't show up for her tonight. All this knowledge of poisons you have now. All right, I'm going to insert my little public service announcement and say what you said at the beginning, which is if you're watching this tonight and you're interested in what we're talking about, you're interested in Sarah's book, I do hope you'll consider buying it tonight from one of the booksellers who's hosting this event. That's one of our missions on Friends in Fiction. We support a different and independent bookseller every week. And it's more important now than ever. So many of them have been so heavily impacted by this pandemic. But they're still doing these amazing things. They're rising to the occasion. They're putting on these events. They're giving you the opportunity to hear from people like Sarah and have these great conversations. So if you're having a good time tonight, if you don't have the book already, we do hope you'll consider buying it from one of the independent bookseller hosts this evening. So another question for you, Sarah. And you didn't even tell me to say that. This is just, I just insert these little PSAs as we go. Right?
Yeah. And that reminds me, this little green button beneath our faces, that's a link. If anyone wants to click that, that'll take you to some retailers as well.
And, even if you've already bought Sarah's book and that's not the one you buy tonight, do try to remember, though, that these booksellers are extending us these opportunities and they need your help. So just, remember that in the future. And I don't know, think kindly upon them. So Sarah, can you tell me a little bit about the research you performed while writing this book? And specifically, because you alluded to it before and said we'd be discussing it, I sure would like to hear a little bit more about mudlarking.
Yes. I would love to. It's one of my favorite, talking about mudlarking is just one of my favorite like ways to nerd out. So
it's a great word. I mean, mudlarking. What's not to like?
I think that more people know about this word now from just listening to me and this book, because a year ago, so many people just seem to not know what mudlarking is, but it's actually this very popular pastime. And there are loads of Instagram handles where people post their mudlarking finds. But basically mudlarking is this. It's searching for or scavenging along a body of water. However, when I talk about mudlarking, I'm talking about along the River Thames. So many people have asked me, where did you get the idea for the book? And I have a book that actually inspired the idea. So several years ago, it was actually over the holidays, I got this book for Christmas, London in Fragments by Ted Sandling. And in this book, he posts pictures of all of these really interesting things that he has found while mudlarking. And I should also state the reason why mudlarking along the River Thames is so interesting and people go out there every day is because the tide rises and recedes twice a day, and it rises 23 to 24 feet. Wow. So every time you think about all of that water coming in and it's stirring up the silt and it's stirring up everything on the bottom of the river, and then when it recedes, it leaves all these cool things that have been dropped or thrown into the river over the last few hundred years. So that's why mudlarking is such like a new adventure every time you go out. So anyways, this book, I had opened it up during this one holiday season, and I turned to this thing that says apothecary jar. And this is a picture of a part of an apothecary jar. And truly, as soon as I saw this, I just got to thinking, how cool would it be if someone present day found an apothecary jar that had like a marking or a clue on it that they thought tied to like a poisoner or some sinister apothecary. And that was truly the kind of the inspiration. So I did go mudlarking in late 2019, and I have a few things that I found. So you have all kinds of like little clay pipes. This is just a fragment of a clay pipe. And there are like hundreds of thousands of those in the river, and then lots of pottery. So lots of blue and white pottery. And I realized to a lot of people, this might just seem kind of like junk or garbage. But to me, when I'm holding something like this, I'm thinking, who last held that? When was this made? Who owned it? What was their life like? And that's very much the question that the present day character Caroline asks in the book as well. She kind of has this moment where she thinks, who last touched this vial that I'm now holding? And so she feels an inherent connection with whoever that unknown person is. So to me, it's just, we all have our interests and our passions. And to me, like, I love these like remnants of history that, are personal. So some of the research that I did once, I went mudlarking and I was writing the book, I obviously had to study a lot about poisons and herbs and toxins. And a lot of people have asked, is the information about the poisons in the book factual? And I can say yes, that about 90+% of the information about the poisons in the book is factual. And a lot of people who work in pharmacy have told me that they are reading the book, and I'm like, go for it, because I trust, my research. And there's a few creative liberties that I took with the little poison guide at the very end of the book. Kind of a fun feature at the back. But for the most part, the symptoms, the descriptions, the odors, it's all factual. So for people who do want to know a little bit more about poisons, I have 3 books that I would recommend. So the first one is called Wicked Plants, and it's written by Amy Stewart. It's a pretty recent book, and it's got all sorts of fun facts about toxic plants, and many of which are probably in your own backyard or in your own community. And then 2 books that for those of you who want to read more about real life poisoning cases in Britain, there's The Secret Poisoner by Linda Stratman. I loved this book. I could not put it down. And it's all about these dinner parties gone wrong, like 200 years ago, where people would slip poisons into people's foods, because that's what my book's about. And then Poisoned Lives by Catherine Watson. And this is another set of real life cases. So this was just, I mean, when I was first drafting the book, these were the types of things that I was reading and just devouring. I could not put the research material down.
Sarah, considering that there are probably many of your friends on this chat tonight, any tips for how to stay on your good side? I mean, knowing now that you have all this ability to poison us, I mean, should we be worried?
No one should be worried. I'm a very good person. I would never do anything illegal. No. And also, most of these toxins you can't even purchase like you could 200 years ago. So, and in fact, the label to say something that's poisonous did not even have to be on medicine bottles or apothecary vials until, again, the mid 1800s. So, but nowadays, I mean, you can't just go buy arsenic, so
that is true.
Yeah. So, or even opium, like that's going to be a controlled substance. So no one has anything to worry about. And my husband's still eating the dinners that I cook for him. So
fantastic. I've been wondering about those cookies you sent, if I was on the good side or the bad side. This makes me feel much better. Okay.
Cookies are fine.
I'm just joking. All right. So Sarah, there seems to be sort of a trend in recent years of books about women from the past who were maybe previously unseen and maybe previously in their own time period seemed to lack agency over their own lives. So I think there's kind of this trend now, though, of giving those women the voice that maybe they didn't have in their own time period, or the voice that maybe they did have, but that history didn't remember. Why do you think the market is so ripe for stories like this right now?
Yes. So anyone who reads historical fiction, I think, will be nodding their head at the statement you just made, which is that there are so many amazing previously untold stories coming out now about real life women in history who, we may not have seen their stories in history books, but if you dig hard enough, there are stories of courage and rebellion out there. So I love this trend in historical fiction, and so many historical fiction authors are writing about real life women. The Lost Apothecary is not about a real life woman. A lot of people have asked me if she was inspired by Giulia Tofana. She wasn't. Very similar line of work, but Giulia Tofana was an Italian poisoner that a lot of people have heard of, actually. But although the apothecary, whose name is Nella, is not inspired by a real person, the work that she does is, I think, it's still representative of the very important things that women did that weren't recorded by history. So here's kind of what I'm talking about. So she has an apothecary register, which is basically a log of names and dates and poisons that she dispenses. And one of the apothecary's pillars that her values that she stands on is that she wants to record the names of all of the women who walk into her shop, because she knows that particularly the middle class or low-born women, their names are not going to be recorded by history. They're not from renowned bloodlines. They're not part of the monarchy. So their value and their worth may not be remembered or recorded anywhere else. And so that's one of the values that the apothecary really stands for. And so although this book isn't about a real life woman, which is such a great trend in historical fiction, I think it represents this movement towards, we have to uncover the really cool, brave things that women have done over so many years. And if you open up a textbook, it's going to be all about wars and politicians and just the names of men. But it's like, where are the women? There are so many cool things that women have done. And I think society is making so much progress. So, I think about Amanda Gorman, and I'm just like fangirl over her Instagram. She's a poet, obviously. Probably everyone on here knows who she is. But I think the attention she's getting, she deserves every bit of it. And she has such an important message. And so I think society is moving in the right direction, but we also still have a lot of work to do. And so we have to keep telling stories.
That's a good point. And you told yours so well. That's awesome. So Sarah, I do want to give it back to Natalie in just a minute, because I'm seeing there's 23 questions in the question box. To all of you out there, if you have a question for Sarah, you can pop it in that Ask a Question box. We're going to be asking her some live questions in just a minute. But Sarah, before I hand it back to Natalie, can you tell us, are you working on another book now?
So I'm working on a couple of different projects, and I can't really share a whole lot, but what I can say is this. I naturally lean towards stories that fall in a similar vein as The Lost Apothecary. So brave, empowered women, atmospheric, historical settings. I love writing cliffhangers, and I love throwing twists at a reader. So I can assure you that any future projects that I'm going to devote my time to are probably going to fall somewhere, in that line. So that's what I'll say for now.
Well, fantastic. I'll look forward to seeing what you do next.
Thank you.
Natalie, do you want to come back on and ask Sarah some of the questions? Whoop, you're muted. There you go.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. Good.
Perfect. Yeah, absolutely. We've got lots of questions. Thank you all, everyone, for being so engaged and enthusiastic. It just warms my little editor heart. So yeah, let's get right to it. So there were a bunch of questions actually about your writing process, Sarah. So can you give us a bit of insight into that? Do you have a schedule, a routine, a lucky charm? Yeah.
I don't have any lucky charms. No, I do have, this is very fitting. I have an essential oil blend from my good friend Roxy that has orange and ginger. And so when I sit down in the morning to write, I put that on my wrists, and it's just like really energizing. Citrus kind of wakes you up. But my writing process, so I share this often. I am such a morning person. Right now it's 8:30 on the East Coast. And as soon as this call wraps up, I'm probably going to go put on PJs and head to bed. So I'm such a morning person, and I love writing in the mornings, and I feel most creative in the mornings as well. So I typically wake up like 5:30 and have some coffee, and then we'll write for a few hours. I'm on a leave right now, so I'm not going into a day job right now, but I do work in finance. And typically what I've done for many years is, like I said, write a few hours before work, and then I will log in for the work day. Right now, it's been great being on leave from my day job, because I've been able to write in the mornings and then kind of do publicity and promotion stuff throughout the day. But definitely a big fan of the morning writing sessions.
Same.
Absolutely. Yeah. I admire you so much for that, because I personally am not a morning person. But okay, and Jamie in particular asks, how did you write the chapters from the different perspectives of the women? Did you write the entire Nella storyline first before starting on Eliza and Caroline's? Did you alternate? Can you give us some insight into that?
Yeah, I get this question a lot. So they very much, when I was drafting the story, I wrote and drafted each point of view on its own. And that's because I really kind of had to sink into the voice, and that didn't lend itself to hopping from narrator to narrator, chapter 1, 2, 3. So I wrote all of Nella's story, then all of Caroline's story. And then, as I mentioned earlier, Eliza was my third character, a third point of view. And so then I wrote her story. Hers was actually the most challenging. I had some critique readers say she doesn't sound 12 years old. She sounds older. So I had to actually go read some fiction told by child narrators to try and learn what techniques have other authors used to write from the point of view of a child. And so that kind of threw a loop into things, but that's part of the gig, is you just have to keep learning and challenging yourself to write differently. So to answer your question, I wrote them on their own, and then through the revision and editing process, you have no choice but to approach the book as a whole and, you know, kind of go chapter by chapter and fix where you're revealing details and so forth.
Absolutely. And I love this question from Paige. You're an inspiration for aspiring authors. What advice would you impart to those writing stories from their heart or working toward publishing?
Yes, I love that. So I think one of the things that I would really recommend is find your community early. So there are a couple of women who I've seen chatting, Julie and Nancy. They have a really interesting story because they met through like a writing group years ago. They drafted their stories together. They beta read their stories. They workshopped together. And then lo and behold, they also got their book deals very close to one another. And then their books came out like 4 weeks apart. And you find that serendipity all the time. I can't tell you how many authors I have talked to who've said, you know, this writing group or this class that I had years ago, we've somehow just kind of gone parallel in our processes and in our timelines. And it's like the universe will bring the right people to you if you kind of just have that trust that, you know, you need to put out the right energy and it's gonna work. So I would say find your community, because those are going to be the people who you can really kind of walk this journey with, and you can read each other's work and support each other when you have good news and lift each other up when you get bad news, which is inevitable. So that would be no matter where you're at in your writing career, I would say find your people. Don't feel like you have to do this in a vacuum by yourself.
That's great advice. And there were a couple questions about the cover, which, I mean, it's backwards on the screen, but
gorgeous.
Man, it's gorgeous. It's absolutely gorgeous. There's even a map inside, everyone. So there's a question, did you have any input? Do you want to, you know, tell us a little bit about the process? And there's a question if you named the little green bug on the cover.
Oh, yeah. So I'll start with that part and then I'll get to the rest. So this little green beetle, you can all kind of see him. This is called a cantharides beetle. And fun fact that I learned, this is probably the most interesting poison used in the book. And I'm not going to give away any spoilers, but there's a lot of species of beetles that are actually very toxic. And so they're just, if you were to like grind them up, like it's a toxin, and this particular beetle is actually very toxic and has some very unique effects on the body that I don't want to spoil. You'll just have to read it to find out. But that's why there's a beetle on the front of the book. And the cover overall, which I have to say is obviously impartial, but I think it's just one of the most lush, beautiful covers I've ever seen. It was a little bit of an unexpected process. So I was really thrilled that my agent was able to get cover approval by the author into the book contract. And so we had it was very collaborative with you, Natalie, and with the art team at Harlequin. And we had a lot of back and forth where they presented a cover concept, and then I was able to kind of discuss it with my agent and with you, Natalie, and we were able to then say, can we refine this part or this part? And the interesting thing about that is, like the book itself, everyone wants the best end product. You all have the same, you know, end goal that you're shooting for. It's just that when you're talking about something like art, which literally is a book cover is art, there are going to be subjective opinions. There is no right or wrong. Someone's going to like more black and white. Someone's going to like more saturated color. So it's like, where do you stop on that color scale? And you kind of just, I don't want to say pick your battles, but at a certain point you're like, okay, we're really getting into the weeds here. And I think a reader is going to see the cover and they're not going to be zooming into the beetle and saying like this little red line is too long. So the cover process, I think it took us about 6 or 8 weeks of just back and forth kind of refinements, but so thrilled with the end result. And at the end of the day, that's all that matters.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I couldn't be happier with where we landed, just like you. And yeah, it's so great to see these comments in the chat. Just everyone's like, oh my God, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
And there are a couple questions about the audiobook. So one question is, what's the process like for choosing voice actors for the audiobook? And the person asking the question loved the women who portrayed the characters, especially Nella.
Yeah, so I had no idea that until you sent the email, Natalie, that we as authors even get to choose audio narrators. I thought that that just happened, that HarperCollins or Harlequin would do that. And so for everyone on the call, I got an email from Natalie. This was many, many months ago. And she said, here are all of the auditions from these actresses who I had like 5 to 7 for each narrator. So she said, rank them and send it back to me. So the audio clips, after you've listened to 20 or 25 audio, it just starts to sound all the same. So I actually enlisted some friends and family and got rankings from a few just very trusted people. And I sent over my rankings, and I was thrilled when Natalie let me know a few months later that all of my top picks were selected. So for those of you who are listening to the audiobook and really like it, I'm thrilled with where we landed, because those were my top picks. And the voice actress for Nella, she's kind of got a little bit of a, she's in the book, she's grieving, she's vengeful. So she really brings that through in her storytelling. And I feel like when I listen to her, like you're just in the apothecary shop and she's bent over this table and she's got a candle lit and, she's blending this tincture, and that voice actress just does her name is Lorna Bennett, and she does such a great job evoking that feeling.
Absolutely. I feel like the voice actors, they're really just artists all on their own. And yeah, it's really just a gorgeous audiobook, very much recommended. I'm biased, but people should check it out. So speaking of Nella, there's a question from Gina, and she's asking, will we see more of Nella in the future? She would love to learn more about her backstory and what it was like for her growing up.
Yeah, so people ask all the time, is there going to be a sequel? And I think anytime you find a book that you like, you ask if there's going to be a sequel. And again, I'm not going to give any spoilers, so I'm not going to tell you what direction that sequel would maybe go. But I will say that I definitely don't feel like I have told every angle of this story that I could tell. And I think probably every day, little pieces cross my mind, like, oh, I could someday build and expand that part out. And, you learn very early in the story that Nella's entire life has been spent in this apothecary shop dispensing poisons to women. And we see one conflict unfold and that's the story, of course, but there are so many decades prior to when the story has been told that I think, wow, who else came into her shop and what was that conflict and story and how could I build that out? So I think that there is a lot of opportunity, and I feel in my heart like someday there's more story here to tell.
Well, I connect with the characters so strongly, and in case that's not obvious, but yeah, I think, they're the kinds of characters that really just feel larger than life and just really stay with you and leave that imprint on your memory. So Gina, I totally feel you. I want to see more of them too. Okay, so all right, Allison wants to know, what's the biggest difference between your first draft and the final book?
Oh my gosh, I have the first draft printed on paper in one of the cabinets behind me. And every so often I'll open up the cabinet and just see this pile of scratched up, there's red marks and highlights everywhere. And I just close the cabinet door because I can't even bear to look at the first few pages because it feels just like it has come so far. But I will tell you, through the course of revising and editing this book, and I think any manuscript, for me personally, I tend to write first drafts short. I'm a little bit of an underwriter. So I'll get the scene and really the structure of the plot out onto the page as quickly as I can. And then where I always need editorial guidance, and kind of I see it in my own writing, and so I'll try and make a personal effort to flesh it out, is characterization. So a lot of, why is the character in this scene? Why is she doing what she's doing? So I've mentioned a couple of times or alluded to the fact that I really like writing cliffhangers, and I actually feel like there are certain elements of my writing that kind of lend towards like the thriller genre, because I just love getting that fast-paced, twisty story out. But then it's through working like with you, Natalie, where you're like, yeah, but I need to know some backstory. Like, why does she only sell poisons to women? But tell me about her mother, and how did her mother inspire her? So for me, I'm kind of like, oh, I know I have to do it, but I just want to get to like, who's the next person that's going to come in and, you know, cause a problem. So, but the good stories and, you know, commercial fiction, they have to have it all. So wherever your weakness is, you just have to figure it out, and you have to get that into the story. So that I think is really the primary difference between the drafts, is just fleshing out all of those quick scenes and just saying, okay, slowly drip feed in some backstory, give me some character development, maybe a little more setting detail, particularly in historical fiction. Those readers really want to know, what did the street scenes look like? And, you know, what were people driving, that type of thing.
It's funny to hear you say that, because my books always go the other way. I write way too long, and then I have to cut them down. Yeah. And it's interesting how everyone has their own process.
Yes. Know? And I've heard so many writers are like that, Kristin. It almost seems 50-50. And that's the like really interesting thing as you attend these, you know, discussions with different writers, is hearing how different everyone's process is.
And there's no right way or wrong way. It's just how you personally can get the right book on the page. Yeah.
Yep.
Absolutely. And what's next? Okay, so I have a question from Jen, and actually maybe both of you can answer this. What book are you reading right now? What's on your nightstand?
Yes, so I am reading Cast by Isabel Wilkerson. It's one of the best books that I've ever read. It's nonfiction. I'm sure many of you have heard of it. And it's come highly recommended from Oprah and all types of authors and indie bookstores. So that's what's on my nightstand right now.
And I have Surviving Savannah by Patty Callahan, which comes out next week. So 6 days from now. She's one of my friends in fiction co-hosts, and it's a great book. So that one's very good too.
Awesome. And then from Kristin, which character did you like writing the best? And I think this is slightly different from the question of which character is your favorite, unless you disagree, Sarah.
So I guess if I had to say which one I liked writing the best, that would probably be which one came easiest to me. And I will say that was Caroline, again, because there are so many similarities between she and I. And I remember writing Caroline, and so generally I can get about 1,000 words down in an hour. And with Caroline, I was just like, I couldn't type fast enough, because I felt like I was writing something from inside myself. And I remember telling my husband like a couple of years ago, I said, I'm never again going to write a historical fiction novel. I'm just going to write contemporary women's fiction, because I can write this point of view so quickly. And then, of course, you know, it's like I start to think about future projects, and I'm immediately drawn back into the historical fiction space. But I would say, since she was the easiest to write, and I felt like very productive when I was putting together her point of view, I think she was my favorite one.
That's so interesting. We have a question from Christine. Congratulations on being selected as Book of the Month. What is that process? I can actually kind of talk about that a bit. So we actually have a fabulous team. You know, they work in subsidiary rights, and they directly, you know, communicate with Book of the Month and coordinate that. And they pitch the books, and we hope for the best. And, you know, we were just so thrilled to learn that The Lost Apothecary was chosen. Sarah, do you want to talk a little bit about how you felt finding out that news?
Yes. Yes, it was awesome. So, I mean, I feel like everybody's heard of Book of the Month, and on Instagram, they have 1 million followers. They have just a huge presence in the book world. And I was just elated because at the end of the day, I think they have very discerning readers making those decisions. And so more even than knowing that the visibility the book would get at that point, it was just thinking like, wow, this team at Book of the Month who gets thousands of books a year, they thought mine was good enough to include as one of their 5 main picks. And so that was the coolest part of it was, just, their stamp of approval, you could say. And so many people have reached out to me in the last 72 hours, just saying like, I picked that book up so fast. Like that was immediately what I put in my box. And it's been just such a cool experience.
Awesome. Absolutely. And as your editor, it's been a really cool experience seeing all the love it's gotten. And just really blowing up social media. It's really awesome. We have a question about what your favorite books were growing up and how did your writing bug begin? What made you want to become a writer?
Yeah, so I always have liked journaling, and I went through kind of a poetry phase in high school and into college when I was like trying to get over boyfriends and things like that. So I've always used words and language as a form of expression. And I always, growing up, liked the idea of being a writer. So I distinctly remember going to Borders Bookstore, which, if any of us, whoever's been around long enough, they remember what Borders was. And I would go through the writing instruction section and just look at these books on how to be a writer. But it really wasn't until my late 20s, early 30s that I kind of took it seriously. So, you asked about what books I liked as a child. One of the more memorable ones was Where the Red Fern Grows. I sobbed like a baby at the end of that book. And any story with animals is going to be, it's going to hit me in the heart. I also, on a completely different side of the spectrum, I loved the Sweet Valley High novel. So there was a ton of them. I remember sitting at my grandparents' house. So my mom's on this call. I was at Granddad Tutu's, and I had this chart with all of the Sweet Valley High books that I read and what was next, and kind of like a Goodreads, but on paper, just a few years ago. And then getting into historical fiction, some of the books that I liked when I was in my 20s, I loved The Historian by Elizabeth Kostova. Mm-hmm. I love anything by Ken Follett. And then those are a couple that are really sticking out to me. And then I read The Dollhouse, which was Fiona Davis's debut. And I kind of thought like, this is what I want to write. Like it just really resonated with me.
Yeah, absolutely. And Kristin, I'm just curious, for you too, how did you know that you wanted to be a writer?
Oh gosh, it's really the only thing I've ever wanted to do, except for a brief period of being completely convinced I was going to be a pop star. But my complete lack of singing ability stood in the way of that. I've been writing stories for as long as I can remember. My mom has found stapled together Bobbsey twin books I wrote when I was 6 about the Bobbsey twins solving the mystery of my father's solid gold missing tuxedo. I don't know why I thought he had a solid gold tuxedo. That was quite bizarre in retrospect. But I was probably 11 or 12 when I read The Diary of Anne Frank for the first time. Mm-hmm. And that was the book that opened up a whole new world to me, because it showed me that books weren't just for entertainment. Books could change the world. And I think after I read that book, I knew for sure that's what I wanted to do with my life. Because, if you can change people's hearts through your words, you can have an impact on the future. And that really meant something to me.
Absolutely. It's the power of literature, right? It really does. It's the power of shaping how we see the world.
Completely. Yep.
Absolutely. And this is an interesting question from Arlene for both of you. It's a multi-layered question, but I think this is really interesting. How do you transition from, a book that you've, maybe just finished writing over to your new project? Does it take a while for you to kind of let go of your current, book after you're done with the revisions to start the new one? Like what does that look like? Sarah, if you want to go first.
Yeah, and I will answer this, and I can't wait to hear Kristin's response because she has so much more experience in this than me. But I will say this, At the heart of why I'm even here tonight, and at the heart of all of this publicity and promotion over the last year, it's because I just really like writing. And so to answer the question, is it difficult to go from, this finished great book that you're out promoting and we have a beautiful cover to now like nothing, a blank page? It is challenging, don't get me wrong, and it's very intimidating, but I'm also like, okay, I can finally go back and do what I really actually want to be doing. And I put this just on Instagram a few days ago, a picture of my desk at like 6 o'clock in the morning. And I meant what I said, which was that this desk, especially in the early morning with a cup of coffee and the lights down low, it's where I feel just the most content and in control. And like, there's no one texting, there's no one emailing there. I'm not checking social media. It's just me and the page and the story that I'm trying to tell. And so for me, not that I don't absolutely love this experience right now, I'm having the time of my life, but I'm also just so excited for things to die down a little bit so that I can return to really the root of what I love and what got me here, which is telling stories.
That's such a good point. And you're right. We do this because we love to write. But I think what people don't realize, or maybe people don't realize, is there's so much more that goes into it than just crafting this story and delivering it. You have to go through so many rounds of edits. And then after the edits are done, you're looking at page proofs, you're answering questions. Like, it's all the little nitpicky stuff that doesn't have to do as much with creativity, but has to do with just getting the finished product exactly right and exactly the way you want it. But that uses almost a different part of your brain. And then there's so much other stuff that goes into it, publicity, dealing with marketing, like all the millions of emails you have to do back and forth, which is great. It's, again, all a part of it, but it's not really that creativity, that channeling your creative spirit into your words, right? So for me, when I get through all those page proofs, through all those emails, all of that, I love that feeling of sitting down with a blank page at the beginning of an outline and saying, okay, like, take a deep breath. Now I can be me again. Because like, the me I am at my core, other than a failed pop star, is a writer. And I just want to write. And it's great timing for that question, because I just started outlining my new book, my 2022 book, this week. And for the first time in a while, I feel like myself again.
Well, I have to say, I'm impressed that you are outlining a 2022 book. That's amazing. You turn them over quick.
You're ready.
I do. Chop, chop.
So maybe we have time for like one more just kind of fun question. So Sarah, who would play Nella, Eliza, and Caroline in a show movie adaptation? Like, who's your dream cast? I think that's a really fun one.
Yeah. So people who know me well know that I watch almost no TV. So I am so bad at pop culture and TV and movie actresses. But I will say that I'm a big fan of Kathy Bates in Misery. And although she's way more evil than my apothecary is not that evil. Nella's not like that. But I just think that Kathy Bates in that movie is just very, I don't know, she's just does such a good job. And I kind of like the sinister element behind her. So I would maybe say her, but she would be less evil if she were in my story. I honestly can't even answer for Eliza and Caroline because I just don't watch enough TV. It's almost kind of embarrassing to admit. I just really don't know actresses very well. But that's the truth.
Well, the good news is that, if it ever does, make it to the big screen, we can only hope you won't be disappointed with the casting choices, because
and I won't have to make the decision. Thank goodness.
That's funny.
Well, it's been so much fun. It's been inspiring to hear, from both of you, just two amazing powerhouses in the historical fiction genre. And I think that's, the time that we have tonight. So thank you, Sarah and Kristin, for such a great conversation. And I'd also like to thank again our bookseller partners, Foxtail Bookshop, Mysterious Galaxy, Murder by the Book, Oxford Exchange, Parnassus Books, Phoenix Books, and eShaver. And just a reminder that you can purchase at the link below. And Sarah, Kristin, any last
Yeah,
words?
I have one more quick thing. Those of you who entered into the giveaway through the participating booksellers, they are going to be picking the winners after this call. And if you won, they will be in contact with you in the next 1 to 2 days. And then I just want to echo, Natalie, what you said. Thank you to everybody for tuning in. I've been kind of watching the chat, and it's just mind blowing, the support and encouragement and for my debut. And I just am so thankful to all of you and my family, my friends, those of you who I don't know, like, thank you so much for tuning in. And then of course, Kristin, I've said this so many times, but it's very nerve-wracking to be a debut with very little name recognition, and you're emailing these big name authors asking if they can step in and host you or do a conversation with you on an event like this. And Kristin has always so graciously supported me. So I want to just thank you, Kristin, for participating as well.
Thanks for saying that. It's my pleasure. I'm really happy for you. This is a great book. And just what a pleasure tonight to be here with both of you and with this rock star list of booksellers. I mean, my gosh, like it's like the who's who of like my favorite bookstores. That's amazing. So yeah, I'm so happy. And Sarah, congratulations, like just big congratulations on this beautiful book. And I know it's going to find the enormous success that it deserves.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much again, everyone, for joining, and stay safe and have a great night.
Thanks, everyone.